Welcome, Wargamers, to the healthy farms of the mortal realms, because today we are talking about the Meat Miser of Odron, a story that comes straight out of the Hedonites of Slaanesh battletome, in their little timeline there, and this is a fascinating tale of what exactly calls to Slaanesh and the various ways that the Dark Prince can twist, turn, and just inject all kinds of chaos into reality. This video was requested by Evan Reynolds. Thank you so much for asking. And if you have a video that you would like to see, please talk to me about a lore bit that you like and leave it in the comments down below. I am more than happy to do it. Rather than being a story about a Slaaneshi army or a particular warlord, this is more of a tale, kind of like a snippet of the mortal realms of just how insidious chaos can be, and at the whims of chaos, mortals are. But right before we dig into that, I'm going to give a brief word to today's sponsor. Hey friends, I will be very brief, but I know many of us are role-playing game fans in addition to being wargamers, and that's why I wanted to talk to you about a fantastic solo role-playing game series called Legendary Kingdoms. This is a series of books that you can play independently or join their stories together, which takes a varied cast of heroes into a classic pen and paper role-playing game world. Each of these characters have their own skills, strengths, traits, and in-depth character arcs, and all of this is done in a choose-your-own-adventure style with some light, like I said, pen and paper role-playing game stuff. Right now, there is a Kickstarter going for the newest entry in this game series known as the Splintered Isles. I have links to a longer description of the game and why it's so cool by me in the description down below, as well as links over to the Kickstarter for the newest game. It's a low-cost, low-barrier entry, fun way to spend several hours crafting a unique adventure of your own. So you can support me by supporting my sponsors and checking out Legendary Kingdoms: The Splintered Isles on Kickstarter. Now, back to the show. Alright, thank you all so much for listening to that. Now this story, The Meat Miser of Odron. Let's read it off. Calorostius Van Bardo, a merchant prince of Odron, hoards as much meat as he can. For in Chamon, gold is plentiful and decent food scarce. His dynasty grows rich through the systematic monopoly of the meat trade and the resultant starvation of his rivals. He survived the Age of Chaos through means fair and foul, among them gathering and selling meat from the most dubious sources imaginable. Van Bardo begins to value his own wealth to the point of worship, personified in the form of the 6 silver cow statues that stand sentinel outside his palace. The scent of the merchant's excess filters through the void, drawing the keeper of secrets known as Anacrusia, the Symphony of Torment. The demon goes to Van Bardo in disguise as a mortal seer and convinces him and his confederates that their livestock are starving and in danger of dying out. Duped by the disguise and fearful of the warning, the Van Bardos accept the alchemical treatment the keeper offers, giving it to their animals and imbibing much of it themselves. The next new moon, each member of the Van Bardo dynasty is transformed into a lowly beast with a human head, while their animals are turned into fierce albino beastmen. With each of the strange hybrids bleeding Slaanesh over and over again, they unleash war on Odron cities at Anacrusia's side. Can we just talk about how cool this story is? Thank you so much, Evan, for sharing it with me. I didn't even see it. There's a lot of these little tiny stories hidden in these books that I just passed right over. And what we have here is fundamentally is a situation where Slaanesh was bound to show up. I just feel like wherever there is oppression and greed and the worship of money and belongings, that's just a calling card for Slaanesh. Now, this story points out a few things that I want to touch on. It kind of solidifies the fact that the realms really do need each other. By this I mean, for in Chamon, gold is plentiful and decent food scarce. This is actually one of the things that I like about the latest kind of story arc for Age of Sigmar is they're really leaning heavily into how the various cities of Sigmar, or just bastions of society, interact with one another. The places in Gore are typically dirt poor, nomadic, but they're rich in meat. This is the raw materials of food. Same thing for Gioran with farming as opposed to hunting. And both of those places need hard mineral alloys to build defenses and guns and weapons and all these kinds of things, and all of that can come from Chamon. And I like these kinds of stories because it just kind of like makes the realms a I don't want to say the word believable, but it's an interesting place where there's interactivity between the various locales. They have significance. They all bring something with their own dangers, but also resources and abundance. Now we meet this guy, Colorastius van Bardo. He's essentially, a merchant ruler of this small city. And the idea of capitalizing a monopoly on meat, on raw, sustenance for people to survive is such a dirty thing. Because at that point, the competition with his rivals becomes mute. He doesn't have to have a better mining operation. All he has to do is starve his competition, right? If you're going to sell food that comes from your market, if you're Van Bardo, anything that comes from your stock that you're being sold to your opponents or your contemporaries, double the price. They can't not buy it. So with that kind of logic, you can really stranglehold a society. All you have to do is control the food, possibly the water, and you're good to go. Now, that in and of itself wasn't what drew chaos, but the excess that followed, right? The, 6 silver cow statues? That's a bit much. And just like I'm sure in any city, right, Odron likely had a peasant class that was ruining and stewing against their more rich overlords. I'm sure people looked at this palace and were like, this is ridiculous. We should all be able to eat. There's all those kind of very human arguments against these kinds of things. When you see true greed and hubris, it gets real nasty. Now, one kind of throwaway line in this that I like to focus on, among them, gathering and selling meat from the most dubious sources imaginable. Now, this was way back in the Age of Chaos as well, so I'm pretty sure it's people. Right, Soylent Orden or Soylent Bardo is what I'm going to call it. That's his brand, is people, which is just rad. Super metal, super terrible, very Age of Sigmar. What's equally as interesting is that the Keeper of Secrets that shows up. Now, this is a greater demon. This is a big deal. When I first read this, I honestly thought it was going to be one of the harp players. I can't remember their name right now, but the Keeper of Secrets shows up, and rather than bringing an army, which of course they could at any time, they go the tricksy route and basically sow seeds of opposition and chaos in the city before they ever bring a soldier onto the table. This is a big thing for Tzeentch as well. Oftentimes you'll have Nurgle and Khorne very much up front. They'll just march the army in. You might see some decay and stuff like that as Nurgle's approaching to kind of give you a little bit of warning. But Khorne just walks up to place. That's all he does. For the most part, anyway. There are certain situations where it can be a little different, but you understand, in general, Slaanesh and Tzeentch tend to be the more insidious forms of chaos, where it can start from within and then boil outward. And rather than, trying to compete with him or just outright killing his cows and taking away that wealth, which would certainly probably drive this guy insane, she lets him do it. Hey, Bardos. I got this potion here for you and your cows. Essentially, I kind of think about what the story had to be for this seer who should just walk up and convince everyone to drink this and give it to all your cattle. And I can think of some stories. Maybe the seer predicted a great famine coming and that, this elixir of health will protect you from it and your cows will stay fat even if there's no food, that kind of thing. I'm sure that's very reasonable in their minds. And I like the fact that it didn't happen immediately. It was just the next full moon. So you take it, you feel all right, we're all set, all things are good, and I'm sure this monopoly on meat happened for some time. Boom, next full moon, things go crazy. Now, I did have trouble trying to picture what it looks like for the Bardo dynasty to be transformed into lowly beasts with a human head. So I'm just imagining my head on a goat body, just chilling, But there's no information. Do they understand what they are? Are their brains not there either? Are they tortured as animals and they have the brains of who they were before and they can't do anything? That to me sounds probably what happened. They're just running around screaming hey, the monsters are coming, something's happening, but they can't help anybody. Meanwhile, all of their cattle get turned into Beastmen, and the thing about the Beastmen is they're not the strongest army. They don't have a herdstone erected yet, so they don't get that sweet +1 rend, but they are extremely chaotic and aggressive. So if you have a palace that is somewhere near the center of the city and all the livestock that you have, which you had a monopoly on, so you have, I'm assuming thousands of heads of cattle. That's not crazy to even think about here in our real world. What happens when an army that size is unleashed in a metropolitan area? It's insanity. And while there's no details, A lot of times, real-world farmers, talking to an Iowan right now, will have different pens for their different cattle. And so if all of them turn, you might have attacks coming from all across the city with no idea what's happening. And in that gap of misunderstanding what's truly happening, that your own livestock was turned against you, and this is from the city guard perspective, you would be looking into the city rather than outside, which is the perfect time for a Slaanesh army to roll up. Now, of course, that's not detailed here, but that is kind of how these things happen. Tzeentch often does the same thing. All the people in a Tzeentchian cult will have one big uprising, and then all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of Zangor outside the city waiting for the guards to be distracted. It's brutal, and it's effective. So I'm just trying to imagine like some random dude in this town just walking around, maybe just having a drink, hanging with some friends, and then all of a sudden they see like a goat with a man's head run past. Ah, they're coming! And you're like, what in the ever-loving heck? And then all of a sudden there's, an albino Bulgor just smashing through walls and stuff like that. It sounds like a fun time. Whatever party you were at just got ratcheted up to 11 when there's like a goat man and a giant Bulgor rustling around. But let's end this video like we end all of them. Why is this story so cool? Right, I'm very thankful, Evan. Thank you so much for showing it to me. The truth of the matter is, it's cool because I like seeing the Chaos Gods infiltrate things. It gets boring if it's just a giant army walking up to a walled city and over and over and over again. But I love seeing these stories of, no, the demon was there, of course, but it made the Chaos Army happen from the inside out. And that is a fascinating idea to me. Because, we look around in our real world, we see, school teachers, firefighters, mailmen, people just walking around the mall, all these just very mundane things. And then what if something that is truly outside of your understanding begins to happen? Like I said, man-headed goat running around screaming, and then all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of Beastmen and Bulgors, all these crazy monsters just rushing the city. How do you reconcile that and then come up with a plan and then fight it and then hopefully execute the entire family of people that brought Slaanesh into the actual city itself? And now everyone has to have like a complex about like, well, are they worshipping a chaos god? Are they enticing one to come here? We need to put them down. Like all these kinds of things. It becomes very internally like paranoid from a city perspective, which is different than a person perspective. It's very, very interesting. Plus, I don't remember another story where like entire swaths of animals are just, snap of a finger turned into beastmen. I know they exist. There are some stories of like people becoming beastmen as they fight against beastmen, like the powers of change and stuff. But this is a big one, right? It was a plan. Everyone who drinks this fluid is going to have a change of some kind. Man became beast, beast became beastmen. But the idea of just like suddenly snap of a finger, boom, there's an army in your midst because it's all the domesticated animals that are around you. That is nuts. So anyway, friends, thank you so much for listening to this video and watching it with me. Evan, thank you again for your suggestion. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you want to see stuff like this show up in a Sylvaneth Allegiance ability? I would love it if you could seed somehow temptation into an opponent's army. I don't know what that would look like rules mechanic-wise, but it's something I think them and specifically Tzeentch as well really need to focus on, because I think between the 4 Chaos Gods, it makes the 2 of them very, very unique. So let me know with a comment down below, and I will catch you next time in my next Age of Sigmar video. Happy wargaming.